Hello and welcome to this review of my 1stplayer Bullet Hunter Mark 6 keyboard. This was a commercial donation from 1stplayer. They asked if I wanted to review one of their keyboards and I said sure, particularly because I was curious about the switches. At first glance it appears to be a fairly standard gaming keyboard, although it turned out to have quite a few interesting traits about it that I'll get to later. It's currently $50 off of Amazon, which puts it at the upper end of the low budget sector. That's to say it's not quite as cheap as some other Asian boards, some of which cost half as much, but is still cheaper than even a cheap keyboard from a premium brand. For this kind of money it's difficult to go truly wrong nowadays, but let's take a more in-depth look. The board definitely has plenty of very specific pros and cons. One interesting thing is that it boasts a relatively large amount of features for a low-budget board and is trying very hard to incorporate as much of the latest trends as possible. For example, it has full RGB, while many of the cheaper boards go for cheaper options such as 7-color or multi-monochrome options like these two. That said, full RGB is finding so much purchase with gamers that it's become almost a sine qua non, and full RGB cheapo boards have become exponentially more common nowadays. Some of you may be wondering at this point whether the RGB is stuttery or badly bundled or bleeds a lot, or whether it shows that weird decoalescent effect when you move your eyes over it very quickly. Now, it's not stuttery, but the colors do curdle when you move your eyes over it, which is some kind of pulse width modulation effect apparently. And the bundling and color mixing is pretty bad as well. For example, this color is supposed to be white, while it's very, very clearly actually pink. As in, really, really pink. Also, it has quite a lot of light bleed, but that's mainly because it's got a floating switch design where there's no upstanding rim around the assembly. Light bleed makes the board a lot flashier, which may or may not be to your liking. Another feature it has that's not quite as common on cheap boards is that it's capable of programming macros, another well-liked feature that used to be almost exclusive to premium boards, but is getting more widespread nowadays. I'll get back to these later when I talk about the software. Third, it has hot swap sockets, yet another trend that's getting more and more popular. Now, interestingly, this doesn't use the more common Kaihua type hot swap sockets, which uses a pair of claspers to grab the contact legs, but something that looks like just holes, really. They seem to work fine, but I tried to remove one of the switches using the included switch removal tool, and this was so incredibly hard that I had to partially destroy the switch, as you can see, in order to exercise the requisite amount of force to pull it out. They did include a few extras with the keyboard, so losing this one is no biggie, and I can't tell if it's the sockets that are a tad over-grabby, or whether the plate retention clips are a little overzealous, but either way, I thought it was worth remarking. Furthermore, it's got media keys, separate ones, not just hotkeys layered over existing ones, and a volume roller that'll be very familiar to many of you. Yes, it appears to be a virtually identical reproduction of the one on the Corsair K70. Who knows, maybe it's even made by the same manufacturer. Media keys are exactly the same as well. It even has the same sneaky screw hidden under one of these shoulder pads without which you can't disassemble the board, which is crap because it's not easy to take one of these pads off without damaging them. Compared to the Corsairs, it rolls slightly lighter and feels less scratchy, but it's ratcheted, which not everyone may like, and it's made slightly cheaper, I think, because it's pretty easy to partially pull or nudge it out, like this. It does have an interesting feature to it. If you press this button here, you change it from a volume roller into a brightness roller for the backlight. See? Like this. I don't think I've seen that before yet. It comes with double-shot ABS keycaps, which are an upgrade from the more cheaply made and less durable laser-ablated caps you'd find on even many premium keyboards. Strangely, keycaps like this seem to be more common on cheap boards than on expensive ones. These ones are made by Eastern Times and look exactly like Datacoms. Their prevalence in cheap boards may have something to do with the font, which looks stenciled as you can see. Now, my theory is that this is because the injection molding is done in a very simple manner, presumably because it's cheap. Apparently, the molding is done in such a way that if you create anything that's completely encircled by the insert, it would just fall out, and this is why every piece with characters that are normally closed are stenciled open, so to speak. With vintage keycaps, this is not a problem, as those generally use a network of lines to help keep all the parts together, but even those that don't apparently use some technique to make it possible to have encircled parts that don't fall out. However, presumably to uncomplicate the manufacturing process and thereby suppress the production costs, and possibly also with consideration to the backlight shining through them, they made this trade-off. The website somewhat misleadingly states that the keycaps are double-colored injection, which makes them sound like triple shots, but I'm guessing they mean that the lettering is a different color than the keycap. Well, whoop-de-fucking-do. Like virtually all modern gaming keyboards though, its marketing page is full of half-truths, cryptic features, and general bullshittery. Or at least it was. It's now taken down, which is a shame because it had a lot more bullshit on it, which unfortunately I can't show you because I didn't screenshot it in time before they took it down. For example, on another part of the page it boasts of 5 extra function keys. Where? Even if you mean the media keys, which I'd find a stretch to begin with, there's only 4 of them. Where are these 5 extra keys? The switches, as I mentioned, are Outemu dust-proof, which they called Cherry MX Blue equivalent on their website, which to me seems like a poor choice of words in the same manner that saying the shoes you're selling are dogshit colored, but whatever. The switches are called dust-proof because of the design of the slider, which is supposed to prevent dust from entering the switch. I guess that by making the slider taller, you don't get as big a hole in it when you press the switch like this, which makes sense. I'm sure dust-proof is a bit of an exaggeration, but hey, why not? I tried to get more details with regards to how it works exactly, but the contact from 1stplayer mentioned it's not an important selling point, so I guess even they don't care about it. It's similar in many ways to the idea behind the box switch, which also uses a tall slider, although box switches also use additional shielding for the contacts. There's apparently an increased demand for dust-proof switches, possibly to do with arcade machines or something. Now, I've heard from some people that these are significantly more tactile than, for example, Cherry MX Blue, but to be honest, I find it rather difficult to feel them apart, so to speak. I think if I did a blind test and I wasn't allowed to hear the noise they made, I wouldn't be able to tell them apart. The Outemus feel a tiny bit stiffer maybe, but really if you want a significantly more tactile clicky switch, I'd really recommend a different switch design than MX, because tactility has always been one of the MX design's biggest weaknesses. The board weighs as little as 870 grams, about 2/3 the weight of the Corsair it so desperately tries to emulate, and barely above the weight of some standard rubber dome keyboards. The top plate is aluminium, or at least some form of metal. I checked it by scratching it with a knife like this, and it flexes somewhat, but not hugely. Light as it may be, it feels decently taut. Floating switch design as well, with the switches more exposed to the elements. All in all, the build quality is okay, nothing special really, but I've seen worse I guess. It does cause a lot of plate ping though, listen to this. So far the keyboard is looking pretty okay, let's say above average for a cheap clone keyboard. Although, as I mentioned, it's slightly more expensive than most in this category as well. But now it's time to take a good deep plunge, because it's time to talk about the software. Jesus motorboating Mary and the cowshed. It's bad. The only things I like about it is that it's simply called 1stplayer Mark 6 driver rather than some clever name like IQ or something completely unrelated like Synapse, and additionally it's very small, just a few megabytes. But the functionality is poop on a plate. First of all, the lighting that's shown on the software doesn't correspond to what's actually happening on the keyboard, and that's something that even the shittiest software can usually get right. See, on this screen the pattern moves a lot faster than it does in the keyboard, and that's just one example. Moreover, a significant amount of the time, and by that I do mean more or less constantly, the lighting gets stuck when you change modes, and even stupider, in order to access the lighting modes you need to tick this tick box labelled light. First of all, why a tick box? Why not just a drop-down menu or something like that? And second, why do you need to have this at all? It's not like this space is used for anything else when you're not fiddling with the lighting. And worse, sometimes it doesn't even work and the lighting menu doesn't appear, so you're just stuck. Now imagine that happening the first time you open the program, you'd be completely lost. Ass-pooping vaginal voids, what the fuck is this flubbercunting shite? And then there's really small, but again really stupid things like the bizarre order of the lighting options in the drop-down menu. I mean, look at this. Wave A, Wave B, rotating A, monochromatic, breathing, static A, reactive A, ripple A, reactive B, mosaic A. I mean, it's got 4 wave patterns, A, B, C, and D. And look where they put them. Here's A, then B, then C here, and D all the way down here. What the fuck? And I've also had at moments where the buttons at the bottom of the menu were cut off by the window frame, which you can't resize, by the way. And finally, there's the recording of macros, which at first seems simple enough. You press the macro key, then the plus key, and then record to record one, and then you stop it at some point, fine. But then I can't find a way to bind the macros to a key, and neither the enclosed manual nor any documentation I could find online for it tells me how it works. I mean, not that it should need documentation if the software was written well enough, but now I'm just stuck here. In fact, why the fuck do you need software to record macros anyway? What's this backwards-ass downhill slide into the necessity for software to use your keyboards? So fuck this shit. Now, I know what you're thinking, maybe macro 1 would be automatically bound to this key marked 1 here, in an absolutely microscopic font size, by the way. But no, this just changes the lighting modes. Overall, everything's clearly done very cheaply, but what do you expect? It's a cheap keyboard. It has a good amount of features really, somewhat of a standout in this regard considering how much it costs, but the marketing, like most boards nowadays, is bullcrap and the software is one of the worst I've seen yet. So it's not without its weaknesses, but it's also not without its merits. It's just a cheap MX type board with a focus on extra features. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.